What does it take to break a man who's already broken himself? The rain fell in sheets, hammering the cracked pavement outside the small-town courthouse. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and stale coffee. James Jimmy Callahan sat slumped in the defendant's chair, his hands cuffed, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor where the linoleum curled up like a secret trying to escape. His faded army jacket clung to his frame, soaked from the storm he'd stumbled through to get here. The bottle of cheap whiskey he'd been clutching when the cops found him was long gone, confiscated as evidence of his latest public intoxication charge. At 52, Jimmy was a ghost of the soldier he'd once been decorated, proud, unbreakable. Now he was just another drunk, another statistic, another face the townsfolk avoided on their way to church. The courtroom was nearly empty. A bored clerk tapped at her keyboard. The prosecutor, a young man with a crisp suit and an even crisper sense of righteousness, shuffled papers. The judge, Margaret Hensley, sat high on her bench, her silver hair pulled back tightly, her expression unreadable. Jimmy had been here before too many times to count. The routine was familiar. A fine he couldn't pay, a night in a cell, a lecture about cleaning up his act. He didn't expect anything different today. He didn't expect anything at all. Mr. Callahan, Judge Hensley's voice cut through the room, sharp but not unkind. You've been charged with public intoxication and disorderly conduct. Again, do you have anything to say for yourself? Jimmy lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment. He could have said a lot about the screams that still woke him at night, about the faces of men he couldn't save, about the bottle that was the only thing that quieted the chaos in his head. But words felt heavy, useless. No, ma'am, he rasped, his voice like gravel. The prosecutor stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, Mr. Callahan is a repeat offender. This is his 5th appearance in 2 years. The state recommends a fine of $500 and 48 hours in county jail to deter further behavior. Jimmy snorted softly. Deterrence. As if a night in a cell could fix what 20 years of war and whiskey had broken. He waited for the gavel to fall, for the same old script to play out. But Judge Hensley didn't move. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied him not with pity, but with something else. Something that made Jimmy shift uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Callahan, she said, her voice softer now, I've seen your record. Not just the arrests, but your military service. 2 tours in Iraq. A Purple Heart. A Bronze Star. You were a hero once. What happened? The question hung in the air, heavy as the rain outside. Jimmy's jaw tightened. He didn't want to answer. Didn't want to dig up the ghosts he'd spent years drowning. But the judge's gaze held him, steady and unrelenting, like she could see straight through the haze of alcohol and pain to the man he used to be. I don't know, ma'am, he lied, his voice barely above a whisper. Life, I guess. The courtroom fell silent. The clerk stopped typing. The prosecutor glanced up, surprised. Judge Hensley tapped her pen against her desk, the rhythm slow and deliberate. Then she did something no one expected. I'm not sending you to jail, Mr. Callahan, she said. Not for 48 hours. Not for 24. But you will spend 1 night in a cell tonight. And tomorrow, you're coming with me. Jimmy blinked, confused. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but a sharp look from the judge silenced him. Your Honor, Jimmy croaked, unsure if he'd heard her right. You heard me, she said. 1 night to sober up. And tomorrow, I'm taking you somewhere. Court adjourned. The gavel fell, and Jimmy was led away, his mind spinning. What was this? Some kind of trick? A publicity stunt? He didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him as he sat in the cold, gray cell that night, the walls echoing with the ghosts he couldn't outrun. The next morning, a deputy escorted Jimmy to a black SUV waiting outside the courthouse. Judge Hensley was there, dressed not in her robes, but in a simple sweater and jeans. She gestured for him to get in. "No cuffs," she said. "You're not a prisoner today." They drove in silence for an hour, the town fading into rolling hills and then into a quiet, tree-lined road. Jimmy's hands trembled, craving the bottle he didn't have. He wanted to ask where they were going, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, they pulled up to a small, unassuming building with a sign that read Veterans Outreach Center. Inside, the air was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and fresh paint. A woman greeted Thema Petite, gray-haired figure with a name tag that read Clara. She hugged Judge Hensley like an old friend, then turned to Jimmy with a smile that felt too kind for a man like him. "Clara runs this place," Judge Hensley said. "She's a veteran, too. Vietnam. Medic. Save a lot of lives, just like you did." Jimmy's throat tightened. He hadn't saved anyone. Not his squad, not himself. But Clara's eyes held no judgment, only understanding. "Come on," she said. "Let me show you around." The center was small, but alive with purpose. Veterans of all ages moved through the room, some in group therapy, some working on computers, others just talking over coffee. Clara introduced Jimmy to a young man named Malik, who'd lost a leg in Afghanistan and now led a support group. "He was like you once," Clara whispered. "Thought the bottle was his only friend. He's been sober 3 years now." Jimmy didn't know what to say. He felt exposed, raw, like the world was seeing too much of him. But as the day went on, something shifted. Malik shared his story grief, guilt, the slow climb back to hope. Others joined in, their voices weaving a tapestry of pain and resilience. Jimmy listened, and for the first time in years, he felt seen not as a drunk, but as a man who'd carried too much for too long. Then came the twist no one could have predicted. As the group broke for lunch, Clara pulled Jimmy aside and handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age, addressed to him. "It came to the center years ago," she said. "We couldn't find you until now." Jimmy's hand shook as he opened it. The letter was from the sister of a soldier he'd served with Private Danny Ruiz, who'd died in his arms during an ambush in Fallujah. The words blurred as he read. "Jimmy, you tried to save my brother. You carried him through hell, even when you were bleeding yourself. I've never forgotten that. You gave us one last moment with him. Thank you." Tears fell, unbidden, onto the paper. Jimmy hadn't known Danny's family had been there when he'd carried the boy to the medevac, half dead himself. He thought he'd failed. But this letter, this single, fragile piece of paper told a different story. Judge Hensley stood nearby, watching quietly. "You're not your mistakes, Mr. Callahan," she said. "You're the man who ran into gunfire for his brothers. That man's still in there. Let's help you find him." That night, Jimmy didn't go back to the bottle. He stayed at the center, talking with Malik until dawn. It wasn't a cure, not a miracle. The road to sobriety would be long, brutal, full of stumbles. But for the first time in years, Jimmy felt a spark of something he thought he'd lost: purpose. The town buzzed with the story of the judge who'd traded a jail sentence for a chance at redemption. Some called it reckless, others called it justice. But for Jimmy, it was something else entirely a lifeline, thrown by a stranger who saw the man he could still become. And as he stepped into the uncertain days ahead, he carried Danny's sister's letter in his pocket, a reminder that even broken things could be mended, one shaky step at a time.